Novak Jovic stood tall under the glaring lights of the press conference room. His composed yet deliberate demeanor carried the weight of years spent dominating the tennis world. The room buzzed with energy as journalists clamored for his attention, their hands shooting up like eager students waiting to be called upon. Jovic scanned the crowd, his gaze cold and calculating, before settling on a reporter in the front row. The question posed was straightforward, almost mundane, a query about his thoughts on the rising star Carlos Alcaraz. For a brief moment, Jovic appeared to deliberate, his lips curling into what could only be described as a faintly mocking smile. Then he spoke, his voice imbued with the confidence of a man who had weathered countless battles on the court and emerged victorious time and again. "Alcaraz is talented," he began, his tone measured yet laced with something unspoken. "But talent only takes you so far in this sport. You need more than flashy strokes or youthful energy. It takes discipline, intelligence, and adaptability. These are qualities he has yet to demonstrate consistently." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Reporters exchanged wide-eyed glances, their pens hesitating over their notepads. While it wasn't uncommon for seasoned players to critique younger competitors, there was a sharpness in Jovic's words that hinted at something more personal. Another journalist mustered the courage to ask if Jovic believed Alcaraz could ever reach the level of legends like himself or Nadal. Leaning forward slightly, Jovic replied with an almost dismissive candor, "To be honest, it's premature to even mention his name alongside ours. The media loves to craft narratives about the next king of tennis before the throne is even vacated. Greatness isn't built in a season or two, it's forged over decades. Let's see if he's still here in 10 years before making those comparisons." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. This was more than criticism, it was a challenge. Alcaraz, who had rapidly climbed the ranks with his explosive style and magnetic charisma, was being called out in the most public way possible. Yet Jovic wasn't done. "When I was his age," he continued, "I was competing against legends and learning from those experiences. I didn't rely on hype or popularity to validate my career. I let my game speak for itself. I wonder if Alcaraz can do the same or if he'll crumble under the pressure." The following day, the tennis world erupted. Social media platforms buzzed with debates and fiery opinions. Some fans lauded Jovic for his blunt honesty, claiming the young Spaniard needed a reality check. Others condemned him, accusing the Serbian star of unnecessary arrogance and belittling a player still finding his footing. Alcaraz, for his part, remained stoic when questioned about Jovic's comments. "Everyone is entitled to their opinion," he said during a brief interview. "Novak is one of the greatest players of all time, and I respect him. But I'm focused on my own journey. I'll let my racket do the talking." Despite his calm exterior, those close to Alcaraz could sense the fire Jovic's words had ignited within him. In practice sessions, he pushed himself harder than ever, determined to prove his worth. His coach, noticing the shift, adjusted their strategy, emphasizing mental fortitude and adaptability, the very qualities Jovic had accused him of lacking. The tension reached a fever pitch when the draw for the next major tournament placed Jovic and Alcaraz on a collision course. The prospect of their showdown electrified fans and media alike. The narrative was set, the veteran versus the upstart, experience versus youth, a clash not just for a match but for legacy. When the day of the match arrived, the stadium buzzed with anticipation. The crowd was a mix of Jovic loyalists and Alcaraz supporters, their cheers creating a cacophony that mirrored the brewing storm on the court. As the players emerged, the atmosphere was electric. Jovic, with his trademark precision, exuded confidence. Alcaraz, in contrast, seemed almost too eager, his movements sharp but slightly erratic. From the first point, it was clear Jovic had come prepared. He dismantled Alcaraz's game with clinical efficiency, exploiting weaknesses and forcing errors. Every shot was a statement, every point a reminder of the chasm that still separated them. Alcaraz fought valiantly, showcasing flashes of brilliance, but he couldn't match Jovic's consistency or mental toughness. By the third set, the match had taken on an almost theatrical quality. Sensing victory, Jovic began to toy with his opponent, deploying drop shots that left Alcaraz scrambling and unleashing passing shots that drew gasps from the crowd. After winning a particularly grueling rally, Jovic turned to the stands, arms raised, basking in the adulation. Alcaraz, visibly frustrated, struggled to maintain his composure. His once dazzling forehand faltered under the relentless pressure, and his serves lost their usual precision. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, with Jovic exploiting not only Alcaraz's technical flaws but also his inexperience. When the final point was played and Jovic sealed his victory with a thunderous ace, he let out a primal roar. The crowd erupted, though the celebration felt one-sided. Alcaraz, head bowed, approached the net for the customary handshake. Jovic gripped his hand firmly, leaning in to exchange a few words. What he said remained a mystery, But the look on Alcaraz's face, a mix of defiance and determination, spoke volumes. In the post-match press conference, Jovic didn't hold back. "This match was a reminder," he stated, his tone as sharp as his backhand. "Tennis isn't just about potential, it's about execution. Alcaraz is learning that the hard way. If he wants to compete at the highest level, he needs to be ready for challenges like this." The fallout was as polarizing as Jovic himself. Supporters hailed him as a ruthless competitor, a champion unwilling to cede ground to the younger generation without a fight. Critics, however, accused him of bullying, arguing his comments and behavior were unnecessary provocations. In the weeks that followed, the match became a defining moment for both players. For Jovic, it was another chapter in his storied career, a reminder of his dominance. For Alcaraz, it was a painful yet invaluable lesson, a catalyst that would shape his growth in the years to come. The rivalry, now firmly established, promised more epic battles in the future. And while Jovic had triumphed this time, the tennis world knew Alcaraz was far from finished. The stage was set for a saga that would transcend the sport itself. The world of sports often revolves around moments of generational clash, where the old guard meets the rising stars, creating narratives that captivate fans for years to come. On this particular night, the atmosphere in the press room was electric. A blend of excitement and disbelief lingered in the air as journalists clutched their notebooks and microphones, still processing Novak Djokovic's clinical performance. The Serbian champion stood tall, his unshakable demeanor and unreadable expression radiating a sense of authority that had been honed over a decade of dominance. Yet tonight, there was an edge to his presence, a subtle finality in the way he carried himself. Taking his seat at the podium, Jovic adjusted the microphone in front of him and allowed a tense silence to settle over the room. The pause stretched long enough to make everyone in attendance uncomfortable. The first question came quickly, lobbed like a cautious volley. "Novak, your performance tonight was nothing short of masterful. What were you trying to prove against Alcaraz?" Jovic tilted his head slightly, a faint smile curling his lips, though his eyes betrayed no trace of humor. "Prove," he repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "I have nothing to prove. What I did tonight was remind everyone, Carlos included, what it means to compete at the highest level. This isn't a sport where hype wins matches. It's a sport of strategy, precision, and mental fortitude. Those are qualities earned over years, not flashes of brilliance over a handful of tournaments." The journalists scribbled furiously, their pens racing to capture every word. Jovic's tone was controlled, but each syllable carried an unmistakable challenge, a gauntlet thrown not just at Alcaraz but at anyone daring to crown the young Spaniard as the heir apparent. Emboldened by the tension, another reporter pressed further. "You've mentioned mental fortitude. Do you believe Carlos lacks the maturity required to compete at your level?" Jovic didn't hesitate. "It's not about what I believe," he said, leaning forward slightly, his piercing gaze locking onto the reporter. "The results speak for themselves. You saw it tonight, when the pressure was on, when the rallies were long, who made the errors? Who faltered at key moments? These are the instances that separate the great from the good. Right now, Carlos is good. But great? Not yet." The room erupted in murmurs. It was rare for a player of Jovic's stature to be so openly critical, even in victory. The unwritten code of tennis fraternity often dictated a certain decorum, particularly when discussing younger players. But Jovic appeared unfazed, perhaps even invigorated by the stir his words caused. He continued, his voice gaining momentum. "When I entered the scene, I faced Federer and Nadal at their peak. They weren't gentle with me. They didn't sugarcoat anything. They pushed me to my limits, exposed my weaknesses, and forced me to improve. That's what I'm doing now. I'm not here to make anyone comfortable. My job is to win. If that means showing Carlos where he falls short, so be it." Meanwhile, in the locker room, Carlos Alcaraz sat alone, his head bowed and a towel draped over his shoulders. The roar of the stadium crowd had faded, replaced by the deafening silence of introspection. The match replayed in his mind like a relentless highlight reel, Jovic's precise serves, his uncanny ability to anticipate every shot, the way he seemed to dictate not just the game but the very energy of the court. Alcaraz clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath the surface. But his frustration wasn't solely directed at Jovic. He was angry at himself, angry for the double faults at crucial moments, for the unforced errors that handed momentum to his opponent, for the hesitation that allowed Jovic to assert his dominance. His coach entered the room cautiously, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Carlos," he began gently, but Alcaraz cut him off with a shake of his head. "I don't need a pep talk," he said, his voice firm but tinged with frustration. "I need to figure out how to beat him. He didn't just outplay me physically, he beat me mentally. He knew exactly what I was going to do before I did it. How do you prepare for that?" The coach pulled up a chair. You learn, he replied simply. You study every detail of his game. You understand his patterns, his tendencies, his weaknesses, because he has them. But most importantly, you work on yourself. He's right about one thing: this sport is about more than talent. It's about resilience, about adapting under pressure. Tonight wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Back in the press room, Jovic was questioned again, this time about his celebratory gestures during the match. Some had interpreted them as excessive, even disrespectful. Jovic waved off the criticism dismissively. Celebration is part of the game, he said. When you win a point, especially after a long rally, it's natural to release that energy. If someone takes it personally, that's their problem, not mine. On the court, there are no friends, only competitors. And if you can't handle the intensity, maybe you're in the wrong place. The atmosphere in the room grew almost combative as reporters pushed back, questioning whether Jovic's comments might discourage younger players rather than inspire them. His response was unapologetic. If words discourage you, how will you handle the pressure of a Grand Slam final or the expectations of an entire nation? Tennis isn't for the faint-hearted. I'm here to push boundaries and set the standard. If someone wants to surpass me, they'll have to earn it. I won't hand it to them on a silver platter. As Jovic left the press room, his words continued to resonate. For his supporters, it was another masterstroke, a reminder of his unshakable confidence and competitive spirit. For his critics, it was further evidence of his arrogance, a trait that had made him both revered and reviled throughout his career. For Carlos Alcaraz, however, it was fuel. Each word spoken by Jovic added to the fire burning within him, a fire that had been ignited not just by the match but by the brutal honesty of his opponent. As the world debated Jovic's remarks and Alcaraz's potential, the young Spaniard made a silent vow to himself. The next time they met, the story would be different. The rivalry between Novak Djokovic and Carlos Alcaraz had infiltrated every corner of the tennis world. As Jovic stepped away from the press room, a murmur rippled through the gathered journalists, each dissecting his every word and expression. The Serbian had not merely defeated Alcaraz on the court, he had orchestrated a performance of dominance that would be scrutinized for weeks to come. Outside, fans buzzed with excitement, some applauding Jovic's relentless skill, others criticizing what they perceived as a lack of sportsmanship. In the players' area, Jovic's team huddled around him. His coach, Goran Ivanovic, wore a faint smile of approval. "You didn't hold back out there," Goran said quietly, a mix of pride and caution in his tone. Jovic shrugged, unfazed by the implication. "Why should I?" he replied, unbuttoning his jacket and tossing it onto a nearby bench. "This isn't charity. Carlos needed to learn a lesson. If he doesn't take it seriously, someone else will teach him." And with that, the stage was set for the next chapter of their rivalry. A saga that promised to define a new era of tennis. In the quiet solitude of the locker room, Carlos Alcaraz sat motionless, his eyes fixed on a single spot on the floor. His mind replayed the match with unrelenting clarity, each detail magnified to an almost unbearable degree. The precision with which Novak Djokovic moved his feet, his uncanny ability to turn defense into offense, and the unshakable calm he exuded even under pressure. It all played out like a relentless loop in Alcaraz's thoughts. His frustration didn't stem from humiliation, but from the stark realization of just how wide the gulf between them truly was. Running his fingers through his hair, Alcaraz let out a deep, heavy sigh. His coach, who had been sitting silently beside him, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You know, Carlos," the coach began, his voice steady, "Novak didn't get to where he is by chance. He's relentless, yes, but he's also a student of the game. He studies every opponent, every match, every moment. That's what makes him so dangerous." Alcaraz looked up, the fire in his eyes unmistakable. "Then that's what I'll do," he replied with quiet determination. "I'll study him the way he studies everyone else. I'll understand why he plays the way he does, why he thinks the way he does. If I want to beat him, I have to think like him." While Alcaraz was plotting his path forward, Jovic was basking in the glow of his victory. Strolling through the hallways of the arena, he passed by tournament staff, fans, and even some young players who gazed at him with awe. Jovic paused briefly when a boy, no older than 10, hesitantly held out a pen and program for an autograph. "Are you going to be a champion one day?" Jovic asked as he signed the program. The boy nodded enthusiastically. "I want to be like you." Jovic's expression softened slightly, and he leaned in. "Then remember this," he said, his tone firm yet encouraging. "Talent will get you noticed, but discipline will make you great. Work harder than anyone else, even when no one's watching. That's how you win." The boy beamed, clutching the signed program to his chest as Jovic continued on his way. Every step he took was measured and deliberate, embodying the duality of his role in the sport. To some, he was a hero, a symbol of resilience and the relentless pursuit of greatness. To others, he was a villain, unwavering in his quest for victory, often at the expense of humility. Yet Jovic thrived on this dichotomy. It fueled him. As the hours passed, the internet became a wildfire of reactions. Social media platforms lit up with debates, analysis, and fiery opinions. The tennis world seemed divided into two camps, Team Jovic and Team Alcaraz. Memes, video breakdowns, and passionate arguments flooded timelines. Jovic's fans praised his honesty and his refusal to sugarcoat his dominance. Alcaraz's supporters, on the other hand, criticized Jovic's comments as unsportsmanlike, arguing that the younger player deserved encouragement, not derision. One particular moment from the match became the focal point of endless replays. It was in the second set, during a grueling rally that stretched to nearly 40 shots. Alcaraz had unleashed a blistering forehand down the line. A shot that would have been a winner against almost anyone else. But Jovic, with his near-superhuman agility, reached it and sent back a punishing cross-court return that left Alcaraz scrambling. The rally ended with Jovic smashing a volley past the Spaniard, who could only watch as the ball zipped by. The crowd erupted in applause, and Jovic turned to them, raising his arms theatrically as if to say, "What else did you expect?" Alcaraz tightened his grip on his racket, his jaw clenching as he walked back to the baseline. In that moment, the gap between them wasn't just technical, it was psychological. Jovic had mastered not only the court but also the crowd and the narrative of the match itself. Later that night, in his hotel room, Alcaraz couldn't escape the echoes of the crowd's applause for Jovic. He replayed the match on his tablet, pausing at key moments and jotting down notes in a small notebook. His frustration had transformed into methodical determination. He catalogued every weakness Jovic had exploited, every missed opportunity, every moment of hesitation. Across the city, Jovic sat in his suite surrounded by his team. They too reviewed the match, though their approach was different. Goran Ivanovic, Jovic's coach, pointed out areas where Novak could have been more aggressive, where he had taken unnecessary risks. They analyzed Alcaraz's patterns, noting where the young player showed potential for improvement. "He's going to come back stronger," Goran remarked, almost as a warning. "Good," Jovic replied, his voice calm but resolute. "The stronger he gets, the better I'll have to play. And that's how we both grow." As the night wore on, the match continued to resonate throughout the tennis world. Fans, analysts, and players alike recognized that they had witnessed something extraordinary. It wasn't just a contest of skill, it was a psychological chess match, a clash of generations. And while the final score had been decisive, the story it told was far from over. Both players found themselves caught in a moment frozen in time, each interpreting it through their own lens, each preparing for what would inevitably come next. In the locker room, the tension lingered, but for Alcaraz, it was no longer the sting of defeat, it was the spark of a new beginning. A weight, almost palpable, seemed to press against every surface of the locker room. The air carried a faint trace of sweat, mingled with the bitter sting of disappointment. Carlos Alcaraz sat motionless, his towel draped over his shoulders like a shroud. The triumphant roar of Novak Jovic from earlier that evening echoed faintly in his memory, taunting him, reminding him of every error, every squandered opportunity. His hands rested heavily on his knees, his fingers twitching slightly as if replaying the grip of his racket during the match. Across the room, that same racket lay discarded on the floor, its strings slightly frayed, a physical embodiment of the tension and effort expended, and a symbol of everything he felt he hadn't achieved that night. The sound of approaching footsteps broke through his trance. His coach entered, moving slowly, deliberately, as though weighing every step. "Carlos," the coach began, his tone measured but firm. "Tonight wasn't just a match, it was a lesson. Novak didn't just play against you, he deconstructed you. He knows your game better than you do right now, and that's why he won." Alcaraz's jaw tightened, his normally vibrant blue eyes clouded with frustration. "I know," he murmured, his voice low but sharp. "I could feel it. Every time I thought I had him, he was already 2 steps ahead. How does he do that? How does he always know?" The coach crouched down to meet Alcaraz at eye level. "Because Novak Jovic isn't just a player, he's a strategist. He observes, learns, and adapts faster than anyone else. You can't beat him on talent alone. You have to anticipate, react, and when the moment comes, you have to strike without hesitation." Alcaraz nodded slowly, his mind racing. He replayed the pivotal moments of the match in his head, the exchanges where Jovic seemed to predict his every move. One rally, in particular, haunted him. He had gone for an inside-out forehand, a shot he'd executed flawlessly in practice 1,000 times. But Jovic had read it perfectly, positioning himself even before Alcaraz had committed to the swing. The return came back faster than expected, and Alcaraz barely managed to keep the ball in play before losing the point 2 shots later. "He wasn't just hitting the ball," Alcaraz said aloud, more to himself than anyone else. He was reading me. He knew what I was going to do before I even knew. Exactly, his coach affirmed. That's his genius. And if you want to beat him, you need to learn to do the same. You have to start studying him, not just his game, but his mindset. What drives him? Why does he make the decisions he does? Across the complex, Novak Jovic sat in a private room with his team. The energy was markedly different. Calm, methodical, almost clinical. A large screen on the wall displayed footage of the match, paused at critical moments as Goran Ivanovic dissected the details. Here, Goran said, pointing to a frame where Jovic had executed a perfect cross-court forehand, leaving Alcaraz scrambling. You could have gone for the drop shot earlier, but you chose to extend the rally. Why? Jovic leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in thought. Because I needed to test him, he replied. I wanted to see how he handled longer exchanges, how patient he could be under pressure. He wasn't patient. He tried to end the rally too soon. That's when I caught him. Goran nodded approvingly but didn't let up. And here, he continued, fast-forwarding to another point. You hesitated on the volley. That gave him a chance to reset. A player like him doesn't need much to regain momentum. Next time, don't hesitate. Jovic smirked slightly. Next time, he'll hesitate first. The room erupted in quiet laughter, the kind of subdued confidence that only champions exude. Jovic wasn't underestimating Alcaraz, far from it. He recognized the threat the young Spaniard posed, and that recognition drove him to be even sharper, more relentless. Back in the locker room, Alcaraz finally stood up, his movements deliberate but heavy. He walked over to his racket, picking it up and inspecting it carefully. The frayed strings seemed to mock him, a physical reminder of the toll the match had taken. Replace the strings, he told his coach firmly. I want to hit early tomorrow. His coach smiled faintly. That's the spirit, Carlos. But remember, hitting harder isn't the answer. Playing smarter is. As Alcaraz moved toward the exit, he caught his reflection in the mirror. For a moment, he didn't see the young phenomenon the world had anointed as the next great tennis star. Instead, he saw a bruised but unbroken competitor staring back at him, his determination renewed. The fire in his eyes was different now, deeper, more focused. Meanwhile, Jovic was wrapping up his own session with his team. As they packed up, he turned to Goran and said, Carlos will come back stronger. I know he will. But so will I. Tonight wasn't just about winning. It was about setting the bar for tomorrow. Goran nodded, understanding the unspoken weight behind Jovic's words. Novak had always thrived on challenges, on proving doubters wrong. But Alcaraz represented something different. Not just a rival, but a mirror reflecting the unyielding pursuit of greatness that had defined Jovic's career. As the arena lights dimmed and the night deepened, both players found themselves lost in their own thoughts. For Jovic, the evening was a testament to his enduring dominance, a culmination of years of sacrifice and discipline. For Alcaraz, it was a reckoning, a challenge to rise above his current level and transform himself from a contender into a champion. The battle had ended, but the war had only just begun.